that light is really bright, and that's actually really good, because it means that I can't really see how many people are out there. So, hello. And I'm going to preface this by saying that I'm still fairly new to speaking, and because of that, I'm probably going to talk at about 1,000,000 miles an hour, so feel free to gesture for me to slow down or anything, but if you could keep all heckling like asynchronous, that would be awesome, because I'm still pretty fragile. So. Anyway, my talk is about the internet and the web and identity, self-perception. And the reason I'm here to talk to you about this is because I've always wondered how technology affects our humanity and how we engage with our environments and with our fellow people. And I also ended up with a psychology degree, and it's cool to use it every now and then. I'm interested in how the internet works its way into our lives and influences our identities and how we build them. So the title of my talk comes from an essay by John Perry Barlow. According to Wikipedia, he's a cyber libertarian, whatever that means these days. His essay is a declaration of the independence of cyberspace. And the statement is about the impact of governments on the internet, but the impact of it for me goes far beyond governance, and it has implications on how we build the web today and how we may want to build it in the future. So to give you a bit of context for where I'm coming from, I'll just give you a little bit of my background. So whenever anyone asks me this question, my reply tends to be, how much time have you got? Because the reason for that is I was born in Sarajevo, originally in Yugoslavia, former Yugoslavia. But because of the war, my parents and I moved to Croatia and then arrived in Canada as refugees a few years later. And upon arriving in Canada, we moved a lot. I lived in London, Ontario, Halifax, Nova Scotia, St. John, New Brunswick, and then Vancouver, which is where I am now. And to add to that, I then went to Scotland when I was 20, got married, and dragged my Glaswegian family back to Vancouver, which is where I am these days. So, as a result, I spent a lot of time searching for my own identity as it fit into everybody else's around me. Like, I defined myself a lot in relation to other people, just because I didn't want to be the little foreign kid. So I didn't try anything really that I thought was risky. I knew that Canadians played hockey, right? So one of the first things I did in St. John was sign up for the local hockey team. I'd never seen a game, but like this sign-up sheet went around, and I was like, yeah, I'm gonna do that. And my dad bought me, like, you know, trying to be supportive, he bought me all sorts of secondhand gear, but the helmet was new, so it's cool. And away I went, and I was looking for the thing that was me, but that fit into the world around me. So I guess why does it matter to you for these purposes? Is because sometime after our arrival in Canada, the internet entered my life. So if you'll indulge me for a second, I just want to get nostalgic, right? Are these familiar to anybody here? Like, how about these? Do you remember this? Yeah. Or this, right? I don't know about anybody here, but like Mind Maze in Encarta was like my jam. Okay. Yeah. So, and if anybody wants to like get nostalgic about these later, find me, because it'll be great. And so just to clarify as well, what this means is, this is the kind of identity I'm talking about here. It's not the more technical one, it's the qualitative one, I suppose. It's the answer to who am I? It defines you to yourself and to other people. It's your past, your present, your future, and it's multifaceted. We have a gender identity, a racial identity, a religious, social, so on. And all of that contributes to our picture of ourselves. And it's contextual too, right? It's dependent on the people that we're with and the situation we're in. And it's a balance, because we like feeling both individual and included, just different enough, just unique enough. And we like being secure in identity. We like knowing who we are. And to build an identity, we need experience and exploration and risk. And so I guess, what does this have to do with the internet then? And better yet, why should we, as developers, as designers, why should we care about that? And to better answer that question, I think we have to look at anonymity. And I know it's a bit of a sort of contentious topic these days, but bear with me. Anonymity, or better yet, pseudonymity, was the best part of that early internet for me, because people took you at face value. You could try on identities, write stories, make embarrassing artwork on Livejournal or DeviantArt or whatever it was. And whenever you interacted with people, you could choose which identity you wanted to present. And the best thing was that you didn't have to commit to any of these identities in real life and affect your parents' or your friends' perceptions of you and submit to judgment. At least not yet. You could try on these identities and see if it was worth challenging those perceptions. And this is important because for me anyway, I could try on these different identities and not have them tied to me for perpetuity if it didn't work out, or if I thought that, oh, that isn't part of me, that isn't something I want to try. So online communities may be the only venue these days for identity expression that can be safe and where we can control that. And that's why Gregor's talk actually from the other day was so important. Safe exploration in these communities can result in a new identity or perhaps reinforce an old one. And either way, you haven't risked potentially negative reactions of the real world. Because, yeah, previously you didn't have to connect your personal life to that online one. And we don't have this luxury in everyday life before where we even speak or interact with anybody. All those other people have appraised us and formed their own conclusions about us, for better or for worse. And anonymity and pseudonymity on the web gives or gave us a chance to avoid those conclusions or challenges against identity before we were ready to cope with them. For example, a young person questioning their sexuality or something in a conservative town with a conservative family may want to explore that fragment of their identity online first and talk to other people, interact with them, and understand that before opening themselves up to the scrutiny or worse of those around them in their real life. And the web gave us those consequence-free communities in which to explore, but it can also take those communities away. As quote-unquote authenticity and the personal brand enters the picture, identity expression becomes a problem and a risk in some cases. And nowadays, everybody's talking about this, about how you can't be both authentic and anonymous. But I think that sometimes we need anonymity to find true authenticity. We need that freedom to give us courage before presenting ourselves to the outside world. And what we worry about now is creating an identity that people around us will respond to in a way that we think is right, or in a way that we think will get us a job. And that's not the identity that we necessarily think reflects us. And this is the exact opposite of authenticity. When we worry so much about how people will perceive us, we won't act on those small fragments that we're curious about because we're too afraid of judgment. And we have very little control over the content and the photos that others post and tag of us and how those other people will perceive them. They're always tied to us, and that can create internal conflict. Like, for example, have you ever taken a picture and had that moment where just before you post the photo to Facebook or to Instagram, you look at it and you go, no, other people won't like it, or they won't see it right, they won't perceive it right, they won't know the context, and then you just don't bother. Or maybe this is just me, maybe I'm just really neurotic about it, but either way, that's a problem, because the web these days is becoming a little bit more about performing or presenting an identity rather than exploring it. Like Twitter too, we often use that for work. So how do we reconcile that with who we are? Do we tie it to Instagram and Facebook, or do we try and keep it separate? And how does it impact our self-perception to see work self mixing with home self and all of these selves out there to be judged by everyone outside of our control? And what about other products that we use, digital products? What do they make public and private, and what does our using them say about us? And what about the products that we build day to day, right? And this is a slippery slope, because why would we try to express ourselves? Why would we take a risk when the potential exists that someone will ask us about it in a job interview a few weeks or a few months or whatever from now. That focus on external image stifles identity and prevents exploration. Okay. So anyway, whenever we build digital products, we also build communities around them. And what we ask people to give of themselves to use those products has a direct impact on their identity. It asks them to tie our products to themselves. They are the kind of person that uses this product. And sometimes that can be counterproductive. For example, Facebook's real name policy, right? That's an example of how digital products can stifle identity, because demanding that people, particularly marginalized folks, give intimate details of themselves before they're ready to can be ill-advised at best and dangerous at worst. So we need to know when we build these products what we're asking of people. This kind of airbrushing of our lives is something that I'm calling identity labor, performing an identity for others to consume rather than for ourselves to explore. The desire to be authentic and immediately tie, a person's face to their every online interaction, when we demand that of them, it brings real-world judgment into online communities that were once separate from it. And it's funny that this judgment is being brought into a space where we should feel the most free, or where we once felt free. And as builders of the web, we need to be aware of this, because whether we want to be or not, we're responsible for what our products ask of their users and how our users express themselves using those products. And of course, I will be the first person to admit that there are caveats, and I have no real concrete answers for you today, and I'm really sorry. The same internet that allows us to explore and express ourselves positively also allows us to be pretty terrible to each other as well. And whether we want to be or not, we are at the heart of this conflict. And not everybody will have the same opinion, right? It depends on the jobs we hold and what our interests are. The director of Facebook's policy in Europe, for example, won't have the same opinion on identity expression as the creator of 4chan, but looking at these opinions can spark a debate about what matters to us, to those who ultimately inhabit these communities and maintain them. But I think that there are some positives to be taken, even from the conflict. I went to XOXO last year, and Zoe Quinn, of all people, encouraged anonymity on the internet to help people explore themselves and find help when they need it most. It's not necessarily true that anonymity creates abuse, because those who harass and abuse often do so quite happily with their name and avatar attached to that harassment. And yeah, there aren't any easy answers to how to explore identity, or also to how we as developers and creators and designers can enable that. Because it is hard to be anonymous these days. It does take a great deal more effort than signing up for a random Livejournal account used to be. And erasing part of that identity is pretty impossible these days too. It's easier to just not bother sometimes and not take the risk of identity expression. And it's easy for us to say that others' identities aren't our problem, especially not when our daily responsibilities are to write code that makes sense and that ships and that won't embarrass us a few weeks or months from now when someone else looks at it. But I do think that it's worth it, especially if we look within ourselves and remember the nostalgia that was earlier when I showed the slides of, Geocities and Livejournal, and try to hold on to that, whatever form that nostalgia takes now. It's not about the day-to-day aspect of writing code or designing something, but in the deeper questions that we ask of those who use our software. How do we want them to tie their bodies to that? And it is our responsibility to keep those safe places in a web that is constantly changing, no matter what products we work on. So as participants in and creators of the web, we actually have that power to build empowerment and identity freedom into those communities without asking users to tie their bodies to those identities. We don't have to give stone cold anonymity in the technical sense, but we don't have to demand that those people tie themselves to a platform for perpetuity. We can choose not to commoditize identity and think a little deeper about the questions that our work asks of people. A good example of this is Geocities. I was at AndiatConf last year, and I recognize a few people here from that. And I met the creator of Geocities there, and we got nostalgic over the old Geocities. And that project aims to bring back the fun, creativity, and independence that made the web great. And I think that's a good first step. And I think that the best thing about the things we build and create online today is that they're so easy to change and evolve, like with something as simple as a pull request, right? We can make these things more human simply in the way we allow users to interact with them and what we ask of them when they do. And in that spirit, we enable people to explore their identities and become multifaceted. The web we build upon will be all the more humane and, in my opinion, all the more interesting. Like, we talk all the time, right, about wanting tech to be diverse. And in order for that to happen, we have to make expression and exploration free of consequence. When we stifle identity expression by tying it to the personal brand, we won't get diversity, right? We'll get the opposite. We'll all be the same because we're too afraid to push the boundaries of who we might be. And the web that we build in the future can still be the one we remember, the one that allows us to express those prismatic facets and contexts and all those different selves. We can consider our impact on identity and write that consideration into our code and to our design. We can choose how we create our communities and choose not to commoditize the identities of others. Like Lourdes, she said on the first day, we picked this industry, so it's up to us to make it better. And they are hard questions, sure, and it's a process, but I think it's a worthy one, in which we make sure that the web is a place for expression and not marginalization, and retain and keep building those humane communities online that allow us to be who we are and without consequence. So thank you so much for listening to me. I really appreciate it. And